Hi, I'm Dave Holt, President of RP Management in Minneapolis. Today I'm going to talk about rent, specifically late rent, and the eviction process. So, when is rent late? Obviously, rent collected on a timely basis is very important to having a profitable and enjoyable rental experience for you as a landlord. Many landlords have a grace period. Now, I'm not a proponent of a grace period myself. I think when rent is due, it's due. It's a consistent way of explaining to your tenants, rent is due on the 1st. If it's after the 1st, it is late. If you give a grace period, tenants typically are not going to pay when the rent is due. They're going to assume that that grace period or the end of that grace period is when rent is due. So I think having rent due on the 1st and late after the 1st, I think it speaks for itself. So when do you file? Well, we go through a series of notices first of all. Now, we don't treat our tenants like necessary evils of rental property. We look at our tenants as customers, and we understand that things happen to tenants, whether they have a job issue, a job change, and things happen in their lives, in all of our lives, where sometimes rent is going to be late. Now, that doesn't mean that you're going to be changing your processes at all, because fair housing comes into play. You want to make sure you're treating everybody consistently. So if rent is due on the 1st and it's late as of the 2nd, you might have a period of time to give out a late notice warning. Doing that, say, on the 5th of the month, sending out a statement to your tenants that they are late and rent is due. Doing it again, say, 5 days later, like on the 10th, and here a little more forceful, which might be an eviction notice, that we are going to process the eviction if rent is not in our office very soon. So what is the process? Well, if they get to the point where rent isn't coming in, waiting till the end of the month and listening to the stories, you shouldn't do that. You should have a very consistent method. Rent is due, here's the notices that go out, and here's when the eviction is going to be filed. By following a consistent pattern like that, tenants know that you're serious. Otherwise, you could be dragged on for months without getting paid. So you file in the county and you pay the fees, and unfortunately those filing fees are very, very expensive. Then they'll typically give you a date which is about 2 weeks out. So if you're filing, say, mid-month, you might have a court date, say, by the end of the month. Now, if the tenant shows up, more than likely they're going to stay or give the tenant some time. So they'll stay the eviction before the tenant will have to move out, and usually that's 1 week that they'll stay the eviction. And so the tenant will give 7 days to clear out, get their things out. If they're not out, then you would obtain what's called a writ of restitution, and you'd get that document, you'd bring it to the sheriff. The sheriff would then post the 24-hour notice to vacate on the property, and the tenant would then have 24 hours to vacate. If they didn't vacate at that time, then you'd have to arrange with the sheriff, pay the sheriff to come out and physically escort them out of the property, and then there's some other things that you need to do in the process after that. But it can get very complicating, and so having a professional company handling the collection of the rents and the whole notice periods and potentially the eviction action is important. So why handle it yourself? Hire a professional. If you'd like to hear more, please contact me.